All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Stark After Dark. I'm your host, Jordan Clark, and this is the podcast all about comic romances and comic relationships. And today I am joined by a talented creator and somebody who's working on comics that involve romance very heavily, Tony Gregori.
Hi, how you doing?
Tony, I was going back and forth with Tony, just talking about what we would talk about, and he mentioned that he's a big fan of '90s comics. That's kind of his jam. Um, and then we got to talking about Fantastic Four a little bit, and his fascination, I guess, about the Reed and Sue relationship. So this is going to be a Fantastic Four themed episode. I need to come up with a clever title. Like Fantastic Foursome seems not
People involved in these romances, so shortchanging them.
That's true. But
Perhaps would be
maybe, yeah. So I'll if anybody has any suggestions, please let me know. We'll work it out. But
positive though, right? I don't want to come at this from a shaming angle or
no, yeah. I mean, it's everything's positive. I mean, we're going to be talking about a huge rock man and his love life. So we're all about positivity. Whatever you want to do, it's all love. There's no
I think adults.
right. So one thing I like to do with guests on the show is I usually start with two questions. First question is, what is your favorite comic book romance or relationship? Is there one throughout comics that you kind of it's enduring? You always like reading about those characters, and you find the relationship interesting.
I'm a Spidey fan, so
Okay.
I'd have to go with Peter and MJ.
Now so MJ's the one, not Gwen Stacy, not any of the other romances. Black Cat.
I wouldn't call Black Cat more of a tryst or
Yeah.
a rendezvous.
I mean, there's
She's in love with Spider-Man, not Peter.
right. That's true, and that's again, that's a weird facet of superhero relationships where you have people who don't know each other's secret identities, so they're in love with the superhero part, or they're in love with the civilian part, but they're not really in love with the whole complete person, I guess. Okay. um so the second question is, do you have a relationship that you just hate, like you hate those two characters together? Every time you read the comic, you're like, oh my guys, I can't wait for these people to break up. I can't wait for this to be over.
Yeah, people are gonna hate me for this.
Okay.
It's Rogue and Gambit.
Oh.
It's so much better.
What is it about it that you don't enjoy?
He uses her. He doesn't really care for her. I don't really. But then again, I'm coming in from the '90s, so I don't know if I haven't really read much X-Men in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps it's evolved and it's different now. But
Well, very recent revelation is they got married, so they're now officially Mr. and Mrs. X. They got a new series that's coming out this year, so we'll see. I mean, I think it is one of those relationships. I was talking with a friend on the show about just X-Men relationships, and X-Men dudes are typically pretty shitty. Like, we were going through the list and we were like, all right, Nightcrawler is fine. Like, Nightcrawler is a good dude. But yeah, I mean, like, Cyclops is not a, not a great dude. Wolverine is not a great dude.
But in a relationship, I mean, I guess his biggest problem is every woman he ends up falling in love with ends up getting murdered.
That's a problem.
But like, he treats them from his point of view, like, it's not his fault that ninjas are trying to kill him 24/7.
I mean, that's fair, but I'll also say that, I mean, again,
he doesn't mistreat his partners. It doesn't seem.
Right. I mean, my biggest, and this might be a discussion I get into every episode now. Is that my biggest
Bring it on.
problem with with Wolverine is that specifically his relationship with Jean Grey, or his perceived relationship with Jean Grey, is that, you know,
Different.
right, right. Well, but 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 that is him, you know, like he became immediately emotionally dependent upon her, when he joined the X-Men. And then it just became, not even like, chasing a woman who's in a committed relationship, but like he was it just got kind of creepy and weird, and like always just trying to like butt in and find the perfect opportunity to get Scott out of the way. And I mean, this is something I talked about too on another episode, is that the X-Men and the Avengers have a very strange social dynamic in that ostensibly they are co-workers, right? They're on the same team together.
Yeah.
Specifically in the X-Men situation, they all live in the same house. So they're roommates and they're co-workers.
Think about it that way.
And they have, and again, depending on who's in a relationship with who, you have very strange uh interpersonal power dynamics. So I mean, Scott is not only Wolverine's coworker, it's also his boss, right? So it's like trying to get
It's like middle management. He's not really.
well, yeah, I mean, he's not like Professor X. So I mean, but but I mean, he's still in a sense superior to Wolverine. So it's like trying to break up your superior's relationship, who's also your roommate, and then like
Okay, but fair, that's fine. But, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But also, like Jean Grey, I remember episodes or situations where Jean Grey like probed Wolverine's mind and helped him like remember
right,
things and actually relieved a lot of the stress and the tension that he was feeling. So, in his defense, like perhaps maybe that has played into his
right.
obsession. And also, he realizes Scott would immediately jump into Emma's bed the minute he found. So he knows that Scott really is just an egotistical prick and doesn't care about himself.
Well, and somebody brought this up in another episode as well, is that Scott, like the whole Madeline Pryor situation where he's like having a child with a clone of his dead wife that is now back. So he's like having his wife twice, I guess, in a weird
Yeah,
like.
it reminds me of like Hulk Hogan with like all his girlfriends always end up like his daughter or his wife, ex-wife. They're all like the same person, and he meets them all at like 19 or 20.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, Scott's got issues. I mean, a lot of them have it. I mean, that's the conclusion that we came to, is that a lot of them have just weird issues. And I'm sure, again, when you go down the line, I mean, I'm not all the X-Men guys are shitty, but even like, again, like in the last 10 years or so, they tried to have a storyline where Professor X was also kind of looking at Jean Grey like, like maybe yeah, so look that up.
I'm not gonna Google that.
Go check that out. Yeah, let's let's get into some Fantastic Four stuff, because we could talk about this all day, and there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Just in terms of the Fantastic Four's dynamic, I think one of the more interesting things about them is that again, so you look at the Avengers and you look at X-Men and a lot of those other teams, and besides the Inhumans, who they're also very closely linked to, all those teams might have some people who are married, or they might have some people who are um siblings. But the Fantastic Four is a family, basically. It's Reed and Sue, who are married, um Johnny and Sue, who are brother and sister. um Later on, when Franklin and Valeria come into the picture, it's Reed and Sue's two kids. And you know Ben Grimm, the Thing, who's basically like everybody's brother in some way, shape, or form. So it's this kind of big family unit. uh in the comic, a lot of the series, even from way back in the day, has a lot of interpersonal drama. Like, they're in space and they're fighting, a nihilist and all these other things. But then, this at the core of the stories are a lot of just their interpersonal.
The dynamics.
Yeah. So I mean, we're gonna go down. We're gonna talk about all of them, but obviously the one at the forefront is Reed and Sue, and it's really interesting how their relationship has at once evolved, in some ways. Specifically, again, you don't really see characters over time, have children and those children get older and them raising their children and all of those things, but has also kind of stagnated in some ways where you have this repeated narrative of, you know, Reed as, smartest man in the world, always in the lab, always busy, always doing stuff. He's always got to be working on his next project. Everything is very serious and has the fate of the world in it, at least in his mind. And then you've got, Sue over here who, like in the very beginning was basically just she was the girl on the team,
Yeah.
and often she was the weakest member of the team, basically is how she was written. She could just be invisible. It was basically her power.
Like
And
Leaves by itself. It's not really.
and I mean, they would use it in interesting ways, but at the same time, um, like, she would kind of be she would Doom would kidnap her, or she would pass out and they'd have to like help save her, and then as time right, as as time went on, she kind of became, a bigger member of the team. She was eventually basically like second in command. When Reed was gone, she was the leader of the team.
Mhm. And she's
Um,
powerful too.
right. Her powers increased a lot,
Yeah.
and
Think about what she's able to do. If you
right,
like take her power and then you extrapolate it and you figure out, oh, where can we take this? She could rival Magneto in terms of like being the most powerful beings in the Marvel universe. I think.
right. So then it was kind of this thing where, she couldn't just be the nagging housewife anymore. That was like, Read it. Did you eat yet? Let's go out. You haven't taken me on a date in forever. You're always in the lab. Blah blah blah. Um, but there's still this kind of dynamic between them where, there's it swings back and forth. They're either really happy together and it's kind of this wedded bliss, or something's wrong. You know what I mean? And it's usually Reed is just being a neglectful dick. Um, so how do you read their relationship as it's changed over time?
Um, well, when I did my little 20 minutes of research last night just to refreshen myself on the dynamics, I came across something which I thought was interesting, which was like the origin of their relationship itself.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure how old Reed was when they went into space and the event happened where they got their powers. But from what I was reading, Sue was like 17, 18
Yeah.
years old, and she was just had just met Reed,
Right.
right? And then he takes her into space. They all get powers, and they come back down, and she's intrinsically tied to him now for the rest of her life because of this
Hmm.
event when she was 17 years old. And even going back even further with her father was like their mother died when they were young, when Johnny and Sue were young,
Hmm.
and Sue's father became an alcoholic and basically abandoned them.
Right.
So she has some deep seated like family things going on. So she meets this man who has salt and pepper hair when she's 17 or 18 years old, goes into space with a guy, gets superpowers unwittingly, and then comes back and now is like basically tied to this guy for the rest of her life. And from my point of view, it feels like she's just trying to make it work
Hmm.
with this guy. She realizes who he is, but also how he's a super genius.
Right.
Kind of like the whole Casablanca, Bogey, like
Hmm.
Bogey is more, and I forget the actor's name, but who plays the guy with the scar.
Yeah.
Elsa eventually is with and then leaves with. I forget his name.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
blanking on it too.
yeah, but basically, Bogey realizes, she realizes that this guy is like part of the resistance, and maybe she doesn't love him as much as she loves Bogey, but she realizes that she needs to like be with him to help for the greater good.
Right.
So I feel like in some way that's what Sue's doing. Because if she left Reed, Reed would probably become like a evil genius.
Well, and that's basically what happened in the Ultimate Universe is that Sue basically was tired of his shit and kind of, and it's, I mean, the Ultimate Universe is people have their own feelings about it. It's a little bit weird because I mean in that universe she leaves Reed to kind of basically be with Ben. And they kind of have a thing going on, but then Reed does turn into, he becomes the maker, and like is one of the, like, if not the premier villain. I mean, he becomes the Doctor Doom of that universe. You know what I mean? Like he's basically trying to, he gets divorced from all humanity, to the point where he's trying to recreate life in his own vision of what it should be. So it is, I want to go back to the idea of, like, what did Reed do to get her to get on that spaceship and go into space with him? Because I always find that one of the most interesting things, like, and because in different iterations they have different reasonings and versions of it,
Yeah.
but like it never made sense for her or Johnny to be on the ship, because really it's, sometimes it's, Reed is the scientist and then Ben is the pilot. Ben is the one who's flying the spaceship. It makes sense for both of them to be on there. In some instances Sue is also, a scientist and has some reason to be there.
We're totally forgetting the version where Doom was on the credits.
Right.
Talk about that.
Ugh.
Yeah,
but
that
then
exists.
but then Johnny, it's also like, why was, I mean, I got to go back and read that original story, because like, okay, you're gonna take your girlfriend into space. You're gonna take her kid brother into space too. I mean, like, I know space.
Why is he going?
Like, I
Why can't
know
he get
back.
her mom too? Like
Right.
her
Just,
cousin?
yeah, it's anybody, anybody who wanted to come along. Really, it was, so they had a lot of extra seats.
Well, their last name's Storm, and that's a really cool last name. So I figured,
Because from my, I think, I mean, they had been dating for a little. It wasn't like, they had just met last week and then she's on a spaceship, but um I just can't imagine any situation in which I could talk a woman into that I wasn't like, because one, I mean, like, again, this is, we got to take into account it's the 60s, space exploration, everything's cool.
yeah,
Obviously we're talking about a comic book, so I mean it's not real life, but at the same time, like, like, it's not, because it's not even like, oh, like, we're gonna go into space and I'm like, because I'm the cool guy who has access to a spaceship, and like I'm trying to impress this woman and like take her to space, and like we're gonna have a date on the moon or something like that. It's like I'm bringing you along on what's basically a research project, and like you're gonna go into space with me while I observe things and probably ignore you for however long this whole thing is going to happen, and then we're gonna go back to Earth.
yeah. I just want you to come up there and see me in my spacesuit doing cool shit, and
Right.
think it's attractive and be impressed by me. And oh, by the way, we need some wisecracks. So bring your who's basically I don't know special purpose. Who's the
but
hot? What could
right,
happen? What's the
right.
run?
But so I am intrigued by your reading of that relationship as well, as just as her maybe not necessarily trapped in this relationship. Like she's not.
But
Yeah.
feeling like, especially since her brother's involved too, and it's
Right.
like super team, and they've kind of devoted their life to this cause. But then, like like you said, it's a comic book, so I don't want to get you know, take it too seriously. But if you look at it just from a metaphor and storytelling, she's never really been able to like explore her own life
Right.
outside, like as an adult.
Right. And she's
You don't
oh,
know, like you don't know how like I reiterated, I have to reiterate, I don't know how old Reed was when this trip.
He was
Or
like a little bit older than her. I don't think he was. I think if she was a freshman, he's maybe was a
senior,
junior.
senior. Okay, so
Yeah.
he wasn't like 25-year-old man.
Nah, I think maybe he was like 21.
Also, why would you shoot college students in the face? Uh, you, uh,
You know
some
what? Empire State was letting them do a whole bunch of shit because I mean the things that Doom was doing in his his dorm room that gave him all his stuff, like they not a lot of regulations going on at that university. I don't know if they're still accredited, but it was not.
no one regulates Doom. So
So so yeah, I mean there's a lot of interesting takeaways just in terms of how you want to view it, because some people view them as the iconic couple of comics, Marvel, DC included. I mean, if you're talking about comic book relationships, you've got, Superman, Clark Kent, Lois Lane, um, for DC, and then for Marvel, you've got Reed and Sue. They're kind of the uh I
they're
mean,
the
they're right, they're literally the old married couple of the Marvel universe, but they're kind of like the
they swing.
yeah.
I mean, Sue, not necessarily Reed, but Sue. She's had encounters with others, I believe.
Well, and what's interesting about their relationship is that from the start, from a fandom perspective of readers, but also just from an in world perspective, like people have always been trying to break them up, like constantly. Like Namor came in pretty early into the whole run of Fantastic Four, and just from the start was like,
I want that.
I'm trying to get with Sue. I don't care about Reed or any of this other stuff. I want her to be my underwater queen, and we're gonna go rule Atlantis together. And then later on, when Black Panther came into the picture for the first time, he was kind of like, "Hey, who's that?"
Yeah.
Doom has always had eyes for her.
T'Challa speaks
Um,
French, the language of love. She got all hot about it.
so it's a very interesting dynamic just in the comics world too. Like like a storyline is basically somebody is trying to steal Sue away from not only just Reed, but basically, I mean, do you Namor is not taking the kids, like Namor's not bringing.
No, he doesn't want to do it. These guys want you because you can basically give yourself like an air bubble to breathe underwater in, and we're made for each other.
Right.
Right? Breathe underwater with your, abilities. And I'm a fish man. These abs. I mean, she's, and when you think about Sue, like when it comes to like physical types, she's kind of run the gamut.
Hmm.
Reed, who we Reed's ability and what he can do.
Right.
T'Challa, who is basically like the epitome of human evolution, right?
Right.
Who has like some special abilities, and a Namor who's a god, basically.
Hmm.
Who's built like a god, and he's got wings on his feet, and you know he's sexy as fuck, right? So
Right. Well, I mean, and again, I think it's interesting because
right,
well, on the one hand, like you look at Namor and you're like, dude, like you could basically get anybody. You know what I mean? It's not like Sue is like not even like offense to Sue, but like like after however many years of her saying no, like probably move on.
but also
But
like Reed. So
right. But I think that's part of it though, is that like nobody, I mean, he's similar to Doom in that like nobody says no to Namor. So like the fact that she keeps rejecting him, I think he's one of
yeah,
those dudes who's like, oh, this is a challenge now. Like
totally.
when I finally, break her down, like she'll come running to me. And then I'll have everything I ever wanted. But then it's also, I think, somewhat is the case with Doom as well, is they're looking at Reed and they're like, and you're not coming to me for that guy, like you're staying with this dude and you could be with me, like I don't understand.
Well, also, I think Namor's thing with Reed is also the way he feels about the surface world in general.
Hmm.
It's like he realizes Reed's role, like he realizes the surface world while he hates it. At the same time, he does need the surface world to some extent to be like stable and not a fiery hellscape.
Right.
It will affect his world.
Right.
You know, but he hates it. He hates that he has to concern himself with that.
Hmm.
And I can possibly read as like, oh, I can't stand you. You're such a dick. You're
Right.
so arrogant, and but you also know you're brilliant, and you know, we need you like in the Illuminati or whatever they call it
Hmm.
now
Yeah.
to keep the peace and fight the good fight. Even though I know like maybe aren't necessarily the best guy, and also he realizes that Sue, like that's why Namor's bogey at the end of Casablanca. He's like,
Hmm.
you're vital to this man's work. Like if you look at a lot of the interactions with Namor and Reed when they talk about Sue, Namor's basically doing the bogey speech of
Yeah. Yeah,
everything.
that's true. Yeah.
You
There's
know,
there's a lot of instances where Namor is basically like, I mean, he's throwing a lot of shade in these conversations because he's basically like,
he doesn't hide his feelings. See, Namor doesn't. That's the thing about Namor. He's never really been a great liar. So
no.
no,
Yeah.
he's
So
too up in his own shit to even lie. I don't even care what you think about what I'm about to say.
right. No, he's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, his whole sentiment each time is basically like, you don't deserve any of this, but like,
Yeah.
almost
You're an accident. You
right.
got your powers from a happy accident. Like,
Right. And so I'm doing the chivalrous and the honorable thing by letting this continue because if I wanted her, like she would be with me, but yeah. So I mean, I think that's such an interesting part of their relationship because Namor is basically the third part of that. I mean, for this whole time, like he's always been kind of just hovering on the outside of that whole thing of people are just kind of waiting, like when's the day that Sue's just gonna walk out on Reed and go to Namor, and is that because I mean obviously for Sue, like neither of those are desirable options, like like none of
yeah,
both sides of that coin are not
if Sue asked me for advice, I'd be like, you just need to be alone for a while. Like
right.
maybe take a couple of years for yourself, like go on a trip, maybe you know fight supervillains on your own, or be with a
Right.
girl for a bit and date around. Maybe get in a poly thing. Don't take anything seriously. You know,
Yeah, I mean, because she again, like as we've seen her evolve and grow and be written with more depth, throughout just her history, like she is one of those people who it's I mean, it's unfortunate because I mean, when you write her into the corner of, kind of neglected housewife, like I think that does her a huge disservice as a character, not only just as a superhero, but as a person. But then I also feel like, she like you're saying, I mean, she's kind of cognizant of her position within the team, like, and then obviously she's a mother, and she's got two young children that she's responsible for. Um, and then
that's a whole other conversation.
yeah. Um, but then she's also, I mean, at the best of times, when both are written at their best, like she really does love Reed. Like she's whether it's just like you're saying, like she was young and like this is the man that she fell for, or it was just kind of, over time, her feelings have grown to a certain point. I think anybody who has been in a long-term relationship can kind of, empathize with the idea of, maybe it's not even that she couldn't do better, because in a lot of respects she could do better, what I mean, depending on who she ended up with, but that, I think she's she's put a lot of work into this relationship. And I think when you've been with somebody for a long time, there are certain things that you've come to know and accept about that person. And it's it's a lot of work to get to know somebody intimately on that level. It's a lot of work to because Sue's not perfect either. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people like to write her like that as well. As she's like, she's the perfect woman, the perfect person, And I think obviously again, character wise, that does her a disservice as like she's held up to this unattainable. light and level, where if she was to ever make a mistake, like it would be like the way you'd be like Mother Teresa, like making a mistake. But like, when you've put all this time and effort into, this relationship, and then there's kids involved, and then there's all this other stuff involved, like I feel like she isn't settling, maybe, but she's found whatever they found something that works. And so, they know that through whatever disputes that they're having, like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that, relationships are work. Being in a relationship with somebody does require a lot of sacrifice and work on both ends. So, she's willing to, but I think that's the thing that frustrates a lot of people, is that rarely do you see that work reciprocated from
That's
Reed's
yeah.
end,
Reed,
right?
Reed's all about Reed. Every little, and every once in a while he notices Sue and oh maybe I need to take her out to dinner or something.
Right.
I've been paying attention to her. It's like dude,
Because
a lot more
they'll
steak for dinner, my guy. Like you need to.
because yeah, I mean they'll have Reed make these like grand romantic gestures out of the blue every once in a while. It's kind of like, oh baby, like please, like I didn't mean to, whatever I did this time, But I think like after so many times though, it's just like, how do you not get that? I mean, again, as smart as he is, he seems to have just terrible time management skills, that he can't like schedule in. Like, okay, so here's a question I was having with somebody else. Is Reed the dude that schedules sex on the calendar, like as like, this is, we're gonna have sex Friday
Yeah, I
from
have
from
a machine from 8 at night. I have a window from 8:30 to 9 o'clock, and then we will go kissing, touching, oral, and missionary, and then we're finished. I will shower immediately afterwards, and I will get back to work.
I mean,
That's me. It's like
and you can't really argue against that. Like that sounds exactly like what
I
you
can
would
argue
do.
against that. That sounds horrible.
But you would think that he would have figured out some kind of work life balance, where he can do the things that you need to do as a married man and a father,
Well, I mean,
and still do the work.
I worked like 10 hours a day drawing, pretty much.
Mhm.
My life is completely out of balance, so I probably don't that. My relationships don't last very long, probably because of that. So I'm maybe like Reed Richards more than I care to admit.
See, and that's where the resentment comes from. Is there's too much Reed in you, and vice versa.
I see so much of myself in Reed. That's why I hate him. I'm like, dude.
Well, so let's, because I mean, again, I want to hear some of the things that you've found just in your research and looking through their relationship, because there's a lot of crazy shit.
Yeah, I didn't dig too deep, and I'm sure a lot of people, if anybody who's listening to this or watching this, who's familiar with Fantastic Four, probably is screaming like, "No, that's not what happened," or they'll know better than I. But I did do like a surface level dive on like some Wikipedia and then some websites and I was kind of amazed at stuff I discovered. Uh,
What's the craziest thing?
well, I guess if we're sticking with Reed and Sue, I didn't realize that Franklin was basically a C-section.
Hmm.
That was they had to go to the negative zone
Right.
to get something from Annihilus.
Yeah, I think they had to get the cosmic rod to
Yeah, to give birth to his kid, and I'm like, what in the and I don't know when was this story made, like the 80s,
I think
90s.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of pro- progressive in a way, and I thought that was kind of cool, but also kind of like batshit crazy. That
Right.
like the character in this book about these people who wear spandex are like, basically, we need to pry this baby out of my wife's uterus. Like, cross cosmic rod that they
Right.
create another alien, and then when he comes out, he's all fucked up. Like
Right. Well, and
the
so
brain off, and then Sue leaves me because I
And
shut his
well, and so that's the thing too. I mean, that's one of the big moments, in Fantastic Four history where they have the baby, and he's a mutant. They find out, and so people don't really know how powerful Franklin really is. And gets to a point where his powers are kind of, because I mean he's still, I mean he's maybe like 4 or 5 or something like that, when this happens, but he's starting to develop, stronger and stronger power levels, but because he's just a child, he's not really able to control it. And Sue and Reed are having, conversations about, hey, what should we do with Franklin? Maybe let's, is there anybody that we could see? Maybe some other super smart members of the superhero community can kind of help us out. And Reed is kind of like, maybe I'll turn his brain off. And Sue is like, what?
That's your go-to? Like, was that his first choice? He didn't like say maybe we should talk to Xavier
Right.
or like maybe another telepath or maybe I don't know psychotherapy. Like, no, I'm just gonna shut his brain off because I don't want him to hurt anybody. I
Right.
never
So I mean,
thought about it. I'm just gonna do it. Like,
yeah. So there's this image, this famous Fantastic Four image where like Reed is like jumping into the panel with like this big ass gun, shooting his child who goes limp in Sue's arms, and like basically just like is just out. You know what I mean? And like you're saying, then Sue's just kind of like, okay, that's too far. Like we're gonna have to leave for a while, and then, eventually Franklin is fine, and Sue comes back, and they're a happy family again. I mean, again, I don't.
still
That's
got back together, Namor. So
right. I
thank
mean,
you.
again, it's like that's some intense family therapy shit. Like when Franklin grows up, he's gonna have some weird conversations with his parents.
Yeah, I mean, it's like remember that time you shut my brain off? I don't. You know, I don't remember a goddamn thing, Dad.
So, and then, but so then again, like when later on when Valeria is born, first of all, Valeria originally appears like in the negative zone as a villain that they're fighting. She's a time displaced version of their daughter that Franklin knows who it is, but nobody else knows who it is. And they're forced to like kill her, but then through a more comic book events, she gets like de-aged and put back into Sue's uterus, and then like
Who did it?
I don't know, I forgot who did it,
I
but
think Doom.
well, so yeah, it was a whole weird thing where that happened, and then she was pregnant, but then Reed was off on another adventure and couldn't get back to this universe, so like Johnny had to call Doom to come in to deliver the baby because they're having similar complications as last time.
That's where Doom comes in.
Yeah, and Doom was just like, I'll do it, but you owe me one,
Yeah,
and that owe me one is I get to name your child.
yeah, and
And
then make
then
him unfamiliar.
right, yeah, and then basically put a curse on her so I can like see everything. That it was again very strange.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's gonna be my spy. She's gonna
right.
be my mole in the Fantastic Four. Your
And
child.
right. And then again, basically as they go on, like, Doom and Valeria develop this very interesting relationship where I mean she refers to him as Uncle Doom, and is kind of like, she goes, I mean she obviously is reading Sue's child, but like sometimes she'll just go to Castle Doom and like hang out with Doom and like, kind of be his weird surrogate daughter. And like I again, like their whole family dynamics are very strange and bizarre.
Cool uncle.
Right. Well,
Cool
yeah.
uncle. Like, he's been arrested a couple times. In a motorcycle gang.
Owns a country.
Owns a cut. Yeah, yeah. Got shit together. You know, he's no dumbass, but he's also
Um
a little evil.
right. And I mean maybe Valeria is too. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. Just because you're born from a superhero couple doesn't mean you're gonna grow
Yeah.
up. You have to choose your own path. So
You make your own choices, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that makes
Um
it interesting for sure.
so
That's
and
like you have all these stories. You tell these stories about these characters for decades and decades. You have to diverge.
yeah. Well, so we kind of skipped over this part, but we can talk about it for a second. I don't know if you read anything about uh the marriage of Sue and Reed, the actual like wedding ceremony. Because it's one of the most iconic moments again in Fantastic Four history, but also comics history, in where Fantastic Four are weird because they're one of the few superheroes in any Marvel or DC who like they're very public figures. Like people know who all of them are. Like they have the names, Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, but everybody also knows like who they actually are. They have a very prominent building that they all live in the heart of Manhattan. Right.
Yeah,
Like they're celebrities, on a certain level. So when they have their uh wedding, it's announced in the newspapers, like everybody knows this is happening. It's a huge event. It's almost like, a royal wedding of sorts. And basically Dr. Doom, like, obviously was not invited to the wedding. um,
that's the
but
problem. You invite it in, you have to crash it, make a scene.
well, that's basically what happens is that he incites all these other villains to go and like crash this wedding. And like at first, it kind of starts out with some low level villains trying to get in, and then you've got like Iron Man and Spider Man and some other heroes that kind of cut them off and shut them down, and then it kind of just continues to escalate and escalate until basically in the middle of the ceremony, there's a huge just superhero brawl in the church, and like everybody's fighting. um and eventually obviously they get married. But it kind of set the standard for a lot of comic book weddings to come, because you just can't have an issue where they say I do and then that's it.
Yeah,
um
but
but
that would be boring. It would just be like the
but
best moment that we've had together for the last 50 years. And it's just them making out. Like,
right,
wow.
just for 20 pages, yeah, it's
Yeah. But then it's like the people who buy the Fantastic Four every month are going to want to see some slobber knocking.
right. So that was kind of their solution, was like, okay, we'll give you the wedding and then we'll give you like this ridiculous over the top
Yeah.
situation.
That's kind of what you want, right? If you're,
Right.
like, if I read if like say they have Peter and MJ get married again,
Right.
I hope it's an issue where like the Sinister Six crash the wedding, and
Right.
that's what you want to see. You don't want to,
um
but they have to
so
get married.
right.
That's what
So
and
well, let's kind of let's well okay, so last couple notes on reading too, because I think there's a few more interesting things. um Grant, of course, Grant Morrison is the one that in his Elseworlds kind of alternate universe version of Fantastic Four, it was called 4321. Doom successfully kind of breaks up the Fantastic Four. I mean, he seeds some doubt and some jealousy and some other things throughout the group, and eventually they all kind of disband. And in the disbanding is when Sue finally goes to Namor, and it's if you I mean just I don't think it would be that hard to find. I think if you Google Sue Storm Namor, like it's probably one of the first things that's going to show up. um there's the a page where it's like Sue, like Namor, and again, like who knows where Namor lives. I mean, he lives in Atlantis, but the way that it's like portrayed is like Sue knocks on his door, and like Namor, of course, is like just in a towel. And like he opens the door and it's Sue, and like they don't really say anything. And then like they just start making out.
yeah,
And that's kind of like the
okay, yeah. She's
right.
like married. Namor, I'm married. And he's like,
um
hubba hubba.
Yeah, but that's kind of, I mean, that was kind of Grant Morrison taking the shot that I think a lot of people were trying to take for a long time. And I mean, again, because it's kind of an Elseworlds story, kind of a what if story. because there's been a few what if stories, if I remember correctly, where Sue does leave Reed for Namor. Um, and I think they always eventually get back. I mean, again, at the end of the story, everybody figures out it's Doom. Um,
So the Doom.
and yeah, but and again, there's also the very strange time that Reed got trapped in Doom's body, and then Sue and him, I think, were also like together, because she knew it was Reed.
Is it this image?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. um, but then the most recent one, and this was before uh the end of the Fantastic Four, as it were, during the latest Secret Wars event that Jonathan Hickman did a few years ago, is Doom basically again becomes God. Gets the power of these ancient elder gods, these kind of aliens that created the universe, and
And he
creates his
makes his own suit.
right. Well, he takes Sue and just assumes, he doesn't just take Sue, he takes Franklin, he takes Valeria. He has Johnny Storm as kind of like the keeper of the light. Like Johnny Storm basically gets turned into the sun, and the thing basically gets turned into the wall that's keeping out this massive, like the Marvel zombies that are kind of trying to claw into his world that he's created. Um but again, that's a very it's very telling that again Doom could literally do anything he wants, and so he's just like, what if I was Reed Richards?
I was
And and but I was also God, and
yeah,
it's kind of like, huh, okay, that's
Reed, right? Like
right.
he hates
uh,
Reed, but he like looks up to him so much because
right.
he realizes Reed's smarter than him.
And Reed has somehow luck it into the life that he would want, all things considered. Reed gets to be the genius, he gets to be the popular one that everybody, in the world reveres for his knowledge.
He has a family.
And yeah, he has a family, he's got a wife, he gets to have all the things that Doom doesn't get to have, but Doom feels he also deserves.
He doesn't have to wear a helmet to cover his mangled face.
so so yeah, I think it's very interesting. Again, when you look at, that particular relationship, it is in some ways it's Marvel telling us like this is for whatever reason, this is the relationship that everybody wants. Everybody wants to step into Reed's. Well, what's also telling, everybody wants to be Reed. Like everybody wants to step into Reed's shoes. Nobody wants to be Sue. Like nobody else.
Because they
Nobody's
don't.
trying to take Reed away from Sue. Like
No, no, that's the thing. Like all the like Reed's never stepped out on Sue,
right.
so there's no. I don't haven't found a situation where Reed's been tempted to be with somebody else or has been with somebody else or even you know nothing. It's his work, and then Sue. He gives Sue that half an hour every Friday night from 8:30 to 9.
And but again, it's interesting that, like, I don't know if it's just the way that Reed presents himself, or if Reed is just like, everybody just knows that Reed would not leave Sue, but like, no, I've never seen anybody make a play on Reed, like from super villains to other superhero women to just regular ass women. Like nobody has ever attempted from that vantage point to kind of break them up. And I think again, it's kind of like, is that because people read as somebody who is just going to state there's
Loyal.
nothing you can do, or is it like, I see this relationship from the outside looking in, and I don't want that.
I think it's a little bit of both,
Yeah.
probably. Like if you see somebody, if you know a couple, be familiar with a couple. Well, I guess Reed just gives off that vibe because even strangers aren't approaching Reed. It's not like
Yeah.
there's women who are like, oh, that I love his salt and pepper brows, or he's so flexible. Like imagine what he could do in bed. There's none. Well, maybe there has been a couple of situations where that's come up. I don't know, but I imagine if you were like, especially if you knew them intimately as like a friendship,
Mhm.
like somebody who knew them, and they split up, and then like say Reed was on the market. If you're a woman, you probably would be like, well, I've seen how that goes because I saw how the dynamic between him and Sue, and I don't want anything to do with that. Like, especially when you're talking about superheroes, because most of them they should be independent. They're
Mhm.
able to, you know,
Yeah.
make really strong decisions for themselves. So you're not going to have like She-Hulk. I really want to put up with Reed's bullshit. I'm like, nah, she, yeah, I'll just, I can find anybody.
Now, do you think Sue, like independently, like when Reed's out of the house or in the lab, and then the thing goes to play cards somewhere, and Johnny's doing whatever Johnny's doing, like, do you think she's on like Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever the equivalent is, like just bitching about Reed to like Medusa or like any of the other, like, do you think there's like a weird like wives club of, the Marvel universe where like all the strong female counterparts, Medusa, um,
Jean Grey.
Mary Jane and you
Well, Jean
know
Grey just does a psychic link between them, like you know,
and
basically
it's yeah, it's just like, what did Reed do this time? And they all just kind of sit and listen. They're like, yeah, motherfucker. Like,
like, oh, that's too bad. But then deep down, they're like, all of them are like, well, I thought my relationship was bad, but it's not like. So they're like the friends who are like, they're like, oh, they want to hear the other person's bullshit, problems because it makes them feel better about their
right.
choice.
And like, maybe Scott's not so bad.
Maybe it's not so bad. Like, he's not. He doesn't work all the time, and he's not obsessed with like every minutia of everything, and we don't have scheduled sex every Thursday night. So at least Scott can let it loose a little bit.
Well, so that's Reed and Sue. But the other members of the Fantastic Four also have some very storied and interesting relationships. I think we should obviously start with Johnny, because Johnny's in a weird situation because he's the youngest member of the Fantastic Four, and I've never quite. I mean, so all right, let's speculate. Reed and Sue probably in their mid 30s to late to early 40s, right? You would estimate.
Sure, that's fair.
Ben probably
Age, probably.
around the same age. He could be a little younger, but I mean, he's not like,
Not Reed's age though, because they're like
yeah, yeah.
the
So
twenties.
let's say he's about, solidly like 33 to 35 or something like that. Johnny is like in his mid 20s, early, like late 20s,
Yeah, maybe
I
late
think,
20s.
something like that. So yeah, so he's solidly the youngest member of the group if you take away the kids, um, and is perennially like the singular, because the thing is single, but it's kind of like it's his burden and his curse, and he's
Yeah, well, he
he's
does it himself too. I mean, he was gonna get married, and I
right.
feel like he didn't marry a woman just because he didn't want her to deal with, being married to him.
And I have thoughts about that. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of was like, that's kind of. I mean, that's that you're taking away her choice to
Right.
right, and B, like you're gonna leave somebody because you're gonna say they shouldn't be with you, who wants to be with you, and then you're gonna sit around and bitch and complain and mope because you're alone. Like I know that's like you're doing it to yourself, my guy. Like you can't.
Well, let's all right. Let's pivot into that real quick, because I think there's a way that we can pivot out of that back into Johnny, because there's some scandalous shared relationship stuff going on between the Thing and Johnny.
Yeah,
Um, but so what we're talking about, for people who don't know, is there is a period where the Thing was getting ready. He was dating this woman, Debbie Green, who was a school teacher, and he like met her. I think when he came into her class to kind of do I'm a superhero speech for the kids, and like they started dating, and after a while, it got to the point where he had proposed to her and they were going to get married, and it was different from, obviously, the last woman he was with was Alicia Masters, who was at once A, blind, uh B, a sculptor. So they kind of had a weird like she liked to like touch him kind of dynamic, you know what I mean? Like it was something was a little weird there. And was also the daughter of like a supervillain. So I mean it was like a triple threat kind of situation going on with them. But this woman was just a regular woman. She was just a school teacher. She wasn't blind. There wasn't anything, like that going on. Like she knew exactly who the thing was. Um, and they had obviously gotten to the point where they're about to get married. And as Tony's saying, like right right when they're about to, go through with the ceremony, the thing kind of calls it off because he's afraid that, she's gonna get caught up in some uh superhero bullshit. And like there's a panel in the comic where like the thing has gone to a bar. I don't even know if it's across the street or it's somewhere nearby. He's gone to this bar and he's alone, and he
He's
and
always
she,
at a bar alone.
yeah. And so his then fiance, uh, literally about to be wife, kind of comes in and finds him. And he makes a gesture over to the Hulk, Bruce Banner, Peter Parker, um who else, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, and Namor. And it's kind of like, because she's making that argument that Tony was just making, and that this is my choice and I want to be with you, and like I fully understand what I'm getting into, and I still want that. She was like, I'm the one who's going to have to wait around while you go off on these adventures, and wondering if you're going to come home. And the thing kind of gestures over to them, and he was like, but that's the thing, like I always come home, their girlfriends didn't. And like I don't know if I'm strong enough like them to be able to handle, if something happened to you because of me, right?
Yeah,
From my
that's true.
perspective, one, I mean, again, look, like you're saying, she's making that choice and decision. So to not even give that a chance, I feel like is a very strange choice, just because I mean, again, from the thing's perspective, it's not even like he'll never find anybody else in the world that would ever consider being with him or putting up with his shit. Like I mean, it's not like it's impossible, whether it's, another kind of civilian character or another superhero. But when you're the thing, right? And you find a woman who is saying, I love you, right? I'm prepared to marry you and spend the rest of my life with you and be with you. And no matter what happens, like to throw that away because you, like quasi feel sorry for yourself, and then also want to like kind of almost like a white knight her in a way where you're like, I'm doing the honorable chivalrous thing here by, sparing you the danger of my life, and like, all this stuff. Like she could get in a car crash.
Yeah,
She could slip getting out of the shower. She could come down with a life-threatening illness. She could be in a plane crash. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
literally anything could happen to her. I mean, that you're
Dangerous
talking
thing.
about the same,
It's
right?
like he's not gonna be like, "Oh, you have breast cancer." Oh, why? Was it because you were a superhero? No. What? Like, wow. Also,
So
like he also like deals with danger daily to protect. Like he goes deals with like things that could destroy the universe,
yeah,
right? So he knows that she could die by like a extinction level event by like
sure.
something at any moment because he sees it all the time. So the fact that he's scared that she could get hurt by being with him, she's just in danger all the time anyway because the Marvel universe.
Well, right. So I mean, again, she lives in Marvel Universe, New York.
Yeah, it's
Shit's
not.
going down all the time.
It's leveled and rebuilt weekly. Like it's
So for him to be like, yeah, but like me specifically, that's what's really gonna get you caught up in some shit. It's like she just leaving the house.
schools are schools are dangerous these days.
Right. There's all kinds of things that could happen. So it's to me, I was kind of like I understood on some level, obviously, what they're getting at in terms of the thing's character and his history and all that stuff. But a like some people have said, after reading that issue, it's like if there's anybody who deserves some happiness, it's Ben Grimm. Like I think he's been through enough shit
Mhm.
where, out of all the dudes, specifically on the Fantastic Four, but also just in Marvel in general, like he's a dude who kind of like he needs a win. Like he needs, some happiness and some love and some security in his
Definitely
life where, you
deserves
know,
some like a partner or somebody to like share your life with.
right. So like I'm all for that happening for him, but like I don't because I think that's one of the things is that people look at him like they look at certain characters like Daredevil, like Batman, like the Punisher, where it's like the Hulk, like part of his character is that he is in some way cursed to
Except for
be.
the Earth X version. Have you ever read Earth X?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's like an Elseworlds book.
Yeah.
Basically, if I remember correctly, I have it on my shelf. I won't pull it out, but basically he ends up with another like a thing woman. I don't remember.
Hmm.
It might be an existing character who developed thing powers, but basically like he ends up with this thing woman and they have thing kids. And like in the story, Reed is like older and he wears the Doom suit all the time and he walks around
Yeah, yeah.
and he finds Ben again and they go about an adventure. But basically, like it was the happiest Ben Grimm I've ever seen, where he's actually like he has a family and
Did
no
he
matter
have
what,
thing babies? Were they like little
kids, they're like
things?
kids and they're like thing, you know.
You,
It's
but what's crazy though? Again, the entire premise of the Fantastic Four, right? With all this time travel, time displaced, multi-dimensional, universal, they never found a female thing. Like never, like in all of their adventures, there was never a woman version, like not a woman version of Ben Grimm, because that's weird. I mean, maybe not as weird as some of the shit that they've done, but
pull it off a shelf and show it to you because
well, I mean, but there was never just a woman somewhere in the totality of all the places that they visited who was just also a rock woman. Like,
well, didn't his cousin get the powers too for a while when he was normal in like the 80s?
yeah,
Yeah, what was her name? I forget her name, but
um,
she was there was a female thing for a while.
there was what's her name? Like, I think it was Deborah Darling, who was like a pop star who but she was in like a thing suit.
No, there's an
Uh,
actual like for a while there, like because he was regular human Ben Grimm for a
right,
while. I think it was like after Secret Wars, maybe. I don't remember.
maybe,
Yeah, because I remember in Secret Wars. Well, actually, in Secret Wars, they all like fulfilled their deepest fantasies. So like
right.
Ben Grimm went back in the original Secret Wars, not the
Mhm.
ones from the 80s. Like Ben Grimm basically made himself human again, and first thing Doom did when he got the Beyonder's powers was fix his face.
Right. Well, so let's let's talk about Secret Wars for a second though, because um going back to one of the earlier and most known and lasting relationships for the thing was Alicia Masters,
Yes.
who was a blind sculptor who fell in love with Ben Grimm, uh aka the Thing, and she was also kind of played as this damsel in distress character, but then also was responsible for the Silver Surfer deciding to help Earth and turn on Galactus. Like she convinced him to do that. But then again, this is I mean this is almost quintessential Fantastic Four fuckery in that Ben is part of Secret Wars, and he goes off and fights all that stuff, and then he gets kind of lost and dispersed in the universe. And so while that's happening, Alicia and the rest of the Fantastic Four are kind of like, I guess Ben's not coming back. And then Johnny's like, hey, you're kind of hot. And then
Yeah, and there's all these other women in the Marvel universe that I could be with, but
so they start going out. Um, and then Ben comes back and he's kind of like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go over here in the corner now while you guys do whatever. It,
thing that I never do.
well, again, it's I mean, again, talking about those dynamics, like
Wasn't that what he
I,
says this when he backs away? He's like, "Well, Johnny could be the man that I can never be," and that's
right,
kind of to like him not knowing.
insinuating, yeah.
Kind of
but it's all but again, it's crazy to think. I mean, from my understanding, did she move into the Baxter building? I mean, was his ex girlfriend living in the same house?
yeah, after he left, apparently she stayed, and was just like, walking around, not finding her own place. It's like
That's so weird.
it's
That's
kind of
so weird.
it's not like they had kids, so it wasn't like a situation to where you're like, well, we're not together, but we have children together, and we're a family still.
Right.
Reason to still live in the same building, like even though we don't like, if I was married or was with somebody, and we had children and we lived in a big huge house, like if they needed, you would never kick the mother of your children out of your house,
Right.
even if you're together romantically, but you still need a place to live, like.
Right.
But if a relationship ends, like, no, just go back to your mom. Like,
Somebody's got to leave.
somebody's
Right.
got to go. Yeah,
And
yeah. Can't
yeah.
can't be happening. Like I've been in that situation before, like where it's like, listen, like I know you left your couches in the living room, but that doesn't mean that we need to live in the same place. One of us has to go, and you probably should leave and take your couch with you.
God. So not only is that happening, but then Johnny's like, you know what? I like you so much. We should get married. And
Yeah.
so they get engaged, and miserable Ben, is the best man at Johnny's wedding to his ex girlfriend, who has lived in the same house with him for now, I don't know how long. But then turns out actually not the same woman because she's a Skrull.
Oh no. And they had a kid. And it wasn't even a kid. It was like an implanted weapon. Like it, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't even like, oh, I had this alien baby with this scroll woman. We're like, well, it's still my kid. Like, no, it's not even really your kid. It's just like a weapon
Right.
that's planted in this woman. It's not even about like, but that doesn't. And then the way we really like is just screwed up to me is that like the excuses or the rationale is like, well, it really wasn't her, so Johnny didn't, hook up with and marry Ben's ex, so it's all good.
Right.
But no, he thought it was.
Right.
Johnny,
Right.
it's Johnny's motivation was Johnny's motivation. Like Johnny said, "Fuck you, Ben Grimm." You
Which I
know?
mean, yeah, and that's the weird thing, because then they try to bring Alicia back in, and like, oh, guess what? Like it wasn't her, so now you and Ben can get back together because like she was in like some weird stasis or something. Like she didn't remember any, like obviously that wasn't her with Johnny, but like she doesn't remember anything past like Ben going to space for Secret Wars. And then it's for her, it was almost like Ben went to space for Secret Wars, Ben's back. You know what I mean? And like, so
Well,
now
you were like in an alien cocoon for like
right.
what? Never mind.
you
And
know,
Reed, do that thing with her brain that you did to Malcolm.
so now it's some weird shit where it's like she's thrown into the middle of this feud between these two men that she has no idea what's happening, but is now just kind of like, I love Ben, like I don't, what's going on.
Did they ever address like Johnny when she came back? Like
i
Johnny
think
like trying to make time with her when
I think they did, but it was also like Johnny A was still kind of like all freaked out by everything that had happened.
Yeah, well,
And
this is
right, and then B, like Johnny, just like, I think he was just like, well, more women, like I'm just gonna move on, and like
I'm just a egotistical kid. So, who's next? Medusa? Who
right.
you like?
So,
Like girl, come
well,
here.
so let's talk about Johnny, because here's the thing. So Johnny, strangely enough, even though he's looked at as the bachelor of the Fantastic Four came into the Fantastic Four with a girlfriend already, and she was basically just like arm candy. Like she didn't say anything. She was often just referred to and not shown in the in the comic. And then when he sees Crystal from the Inhumans, who is Medusa's sister, and all that stuff, he's like, "Yo," and this is his words. She makes my girlfriend look like a boy. Yes. And then
What year was
imme- I don't
60?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I had to be.
Um and so like and this is literally on site. Like he has just seen her in the street. And so he's like, I know I know it would be unfaithful to like chase her, but then he does it anyways. And like and then so like his original girlfriend is just like she's not they don't mention her anymore. Like she's gone. It's to never be heard from again. And then so he gets into
Probably made out. That was the best possible thing that could have happened to her. Like honestly, like from that point on, I my fanfic is that woman had an amazing life.
I mean, yeah, she definitely like probably just went on to just live her best life without Johnny because
Just exploring relationships and life and education and
right.
career and whatever else without having to deal with this emotional weight,
Right.
ball and chain.
So they write Johnny and Crystal of the Inhumans as this kind of Romeo and Juliet esque relationship where she can't interact with humans because it's against Inhuman code. Like she'll be thrown out of the Inhumans if she like is with Johnny, and like Johnny's just like fuck that. Like just you're hot basically and like I want to be with you. So like, I don't care what your family says. And Crystal's kind of rebellious, so like they kind of go back and forth and ultimately like it's decided between the Inhumans and the Fantastic Four that, this relationship can continue and all that stuff. And then Crystal becomes a part of the Fantastic Four for a while, I think when Sue is out of the picture. And then through this whole relationship, it's just kind of this weird thing where like Johnny is like trying to get her to leave her family over and over again, but then will leave her over and over again to go do Fantastic Four shit, and then we'll come back and she'll be like, "Next time I get to go with you," and he's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever," and then like to continue, and then just leaves again. And then she leaves multiple times to go be with the Inhuman family. She's got to go do stuff. And it just turns into this weird, back and forth relationship where like, I think a lot of people look at that relationship and think, Crystal got done wrong by Johnny, and Johnny was an emotional child throughout the whole thing. And that's probably true on a lot of levels, but they were also just probably not good for each other.
No, didn't she eventually leave because of like Earth was polluted and
Yeah.
be on Earth? Yeah. So I mean, if their Earthlings are polluted, if we're polluted, she can handle our germs. I mean, just being with Johnny probably got her sick, right? Not like he's a human, and then he's also like slept with a million people, so he's probably got
Yeah,
something going on.
probably. Because I mean, this is and you saw this on his Wikipedia page is that Johnny Storm is known for having relations with civilians. Is that how it was phrased?
Yes, heroes and civilians. Like so,
So yeah, Johnny's basically. I mean, again, so I mean, he's a youngish single dude, famous single dude in New York, who's kind of playing the field and trying to live his life, in the way that he wants to do it. But then he's also kind of like, at the height of everybody else's relationships, Alicia and the Thing and Reed and Sue. He's kind of like, oh, everybody else has somebody like. I want to have somebody, but then he also like just can't keep his shit together.
no, because he's hooked up with everybody.
Right.
Up with Rogue, with Medusa, he's hooked up. I mean, it's
Right. And
he
that's
doesn't can't slow it down.
no. and it's kind of the weird. I mean, it's the weird thing with him where I mean, he is kind of a classic fuckboy stereotype where like he wants women to like be with him and like he goes into every relationship like, yeah baby, you're the one, like you and me, like we're gonna like be together forever, and like I've never loved anybody like I love you. And then like a few months later he's kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah but
He died when he was young, and he never lived with his mom.
that's, yeah, he had, I mean he had Sue, who I guess was dealing with her own shit.
Yeah,
um
like a mother, like he never.
right.
She passed away when he was young, and grew up with the alcoholic dad and foster care with his sister, and grew up and has horrible relationships with women.
Yeah, well, and again, it sounds like all of the Fantastic Four just need to go into therapy.
Yeah, if you think
And
about it, though, when it was written, like when it was created, it was really kind of like for its time to come up with something like that
mhm,
and add those sorts of layers. Like, yeah, you know, they whether they intentionally did it, I'm sure they did. They create these characters who have a messed up situation with their parents, and then that develops as they get older, like shapes their relationships. And they did that. They even did that back. We were doing that back in the '60s and the '70s.
yeah. So would you, I mean, so would you say that the Fantastic Four are just inherently damaged people then, and that
Well,
reflects
they're
their
people.
relationships?
Normal. I mean,
Right.
they're family. They're a family, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
can go on about my family, and you know, like they don't have any scroll babies, but they definitely have like definitely a lot of skeletons in our closets, and like a lot of
Right.
siblings doing this because of this. So yeah, it's relatable. But
Definitely.
yeah,
Um, I'm trying to think. Well, so the last Johnny Storm note, I think I have. So he has got a long list, but there's Crystal, and then I think the Skrull woman was like Lydia, I believe. Um, so it's, I mean, I don't know if you even count Alicia as a relationship since it was never really her, but I mean you can kind of throw in there.
I think you should, from the point perspective of like Johnny meant to hook up with his best friend's ex. So that in that sense, that was Alicia. So
Right.
Johnny intended to do that, knowing, or in his mind, thinking was what in full realization of what he was doing.
Right.
Yeah. So
And
whether that was a scroll or not, it's inconsequential.
that's true.
Just as real.
Um
With
it's,
Frankie Ray was a name that came up, and I guess she became a Herald of Galactus.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that was interesting. Like Johnny got left for Galactus, basically.
right.
Meanwhile,
Um
there's always
and
bigger fish. He's like, I'm Johnny Storm. I'm remember the Fantastic Four. I'm famous. I'm handsome. It's like, yeah, but this guy eats plants, dude. Like,
yeah, I'm gonna go over here now.
I'm
This is
cosmic. I don't really care about your silly little like full nova, supernova bullshit.
right.
Like, I'm paracosmic and I want to watch this dude eat planets because it turns me on.
Or again, even rather like I would rather do this
Yeah,
than
I'd
to
rather
continue this relationship.
I'd rather be the harbinger for a destruction of the entire planet than deal with your fucking bullshit.
So
I'd
there's
rather be the bearer of the worst news ever. I'd rather deal with that every day, or once a week, or every day, once a week, every week for the rest of my life. And I will live forever because I'm living in the power cosmic.
right.
I'm the herald to Galactus. I'd rather be that guy, that woman, that person, than like have to listen to you talk about yourself. That is monotonous.
So then after that,
Dying never get old, but Johnny Storm stories about Johnny Storm definitely.
and I'm sure in some region of the Marvel universe, there's a Johnny Storm support group of women who've had to endure like his shit. And they're
Yeah,
just like, yeah, can you believe? Did he tell you this story? How many times did you hear this one?
I get it. Your best friend's with Spider Man.
Yeah. Oh
Okay, man.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You died. You came back. Great. All right.
Great.
Mm.
Used to be an android. Now, uh, I bet he was more interesting than you.
So then after that, it was brief, but it was interesting because it was a play on the Sue Namor relationship where he hooked up with Namorita, who is
Is another word for she's a drink that you find get in tattoos.
I mean, again, it's I don't know if it was intentionally supposed to be the relationship that never could be, in a way, just kind of playing off of that. There are also, the fire and water aspects of it, um, and they kind of had their fling for a little bit. But again, it's interesting in all of these relationships. Johnny's the one that gets dumped. Like Johnny doesn't do the dumping. Like these women dump Johnny
Mm-hmm.
to go be the Herald of Galactus or to just leave the pollution of Earth or whatever other reason they can come up with to get out of this relationship. Um,
Scroll.
Actually, I'm a scroll. Sorry, bro. I gotta go.
Yeah. That hurt significantly less than the Herald of Galactus.
Like, can you imagine if that was just like her ultimate trump card? Like, she's just been holding on to that for so long. And then finally she was like, you know what, fuck it. I'm a scroll, okay? And this is like
Yeah.
this is going on long enough.
I actually love you. Like the only type of being that can put up with your bullshit is a scroll. Like, we're used to just being around douchebag people. You fit right in. Are you sure you're not a scroll, Johnny Storm?
Maybe secretly, who knows?
Yeah.
But then so his latest relationship is, I mean, and this, I mean, again, this is where the
so you're gonna have to enlighten me.
Yeah, well, he finally got around to Medusa.
Okay.
And yeah, so not only is Johnny Storm the guy who dated his best friend's ex, he's also the guy that dated his ex's sister. Uh, so that's two strikes against Johnny. I mean, I guess he might as well just find just like he's got to just go for Aunt May next, I guess. I mean, that's fine. That's the trifecta.
So where's
Is
Black Bolt during this?
Black Bolt, like it was a weird, yeah, it was, so like there's a bunch of weird inhuman stuff that was going on at the time, and basically what happened was, due to the events of this thing with Thanos called Infinity, Black Bolt, somewhat manipulated by Maximus, but also kind of like in cahoots with Maximus, crashes Adelon into, I guess, the Manhattan harbor. Like he just into some river. I think maybe the East River, and so um like he's kind of exiled in a way. Like he kind of fakes his own death and then like comes back. So he's running this weird like Inhumans bar, like this speakeasy almost, like called the Quiet Room. And like he's kind of like, but him and Medusa are kind of like separated because Medusa obviously was not in on this crashing of their home into a river, and is kind of like taken over as the ruler, the sole ruler of the Inhumans empire, while Black Bolt's kind of on the out. So Black Bolt is still around.
He's just on his like little spirit, his vision quest or whatever.
Kind of, yeah. Like, I mean, he's they're both kind of finding themselves in a way. They're on a break, right?
Who comes knocking?
John, and then Johnny's like, huh? Well, because and then Johnny's in this weird place where, it's after the latest Secret Wars, and so it again, it's written. It was always written to me in a weird way where, like, everybody basically, I don't know if they forgot about the Fantastic Four, but like the Fantastic Four just weren't an integral part of the Marvel universe in the same way. But like the Thing is still around and Johnny Storm is still around, but Reed, Sue, and the kids are off basically recreating the rest of the universe after, the events of the end of Secret War. So Johnny goes to just join the Inhumans because they're the only other kind of family situationship he knows. And while he's there, he's kind of like, hey, Medusa, you're single, I'm single, like maybe we should do this.
I got nothing else going on. She's like,
Right.
I'll do this for a while. You be my fuck boy for a while until I
Right.
get back, and then I'll just probably get rid of you.
Right. So, again, I mean, that relationship eventually ended just because it was too weird for everybody involved. But like, again, it's just kind of like there, there's something to be said if it was like, okay, like Johnny found himself in just a very weird situation. Things happen, passions heat up, pun intended, all that
Yeah,
stuff. Like,
it happens.
but in both of these instances, Johnny Storm instigated these were like he sought
Yeah,
both of those relationships.
yeah,
Um,
the intent was there.
right.
It was like he's like, oh, there's a pic. The Inhumans are having a picnic at the Civic Center, and he goes over there, and just innocently hanging out with Medusa, and one thing led to another. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm going over there to knock boots because I've been
Right.
into her hair, and like also like I can have something on Black Bolt when he comes back.
I know. Well, then, yeah, and then I mean, Black Buck came back eventually, but
Oh,
it
he
was
did.
just kind of like a weird.
Did not even find out.
No, I mean, he knew about it,
Oh, he did.
but yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I think he was kind of like, he didn't want to. Like he was like, I'm gonna let Medusa do whatever she's gonna like. She's doing what she's doing. I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, he again from Black Bolt's perspective, you're like, damn, like you couldn't get Captain America, you couldn't get like
yeah.
you know,
Like really, like
Johnny. All right.
yeah. But then again, I guess it's like like she probably knew that this is just a fling.
Yeah,
Yeah, so like, why you don't fling with Captain America?
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, if fuck Mary kill, you marry Captain America, you kill Johnny Storm. No, you fuck Johnny, you kill Rockbell, or I don't.
so, so yeah, I mean, I
I,
think I
Captain America doesn't fling. I can't imagine Captain America fling.
nah, yeah, he's too old fashioned for. I mean, even him and Sharon have been a thing for so long that I think that they, um, no matter what, I think that's kind of his main.
Yeah,
He's kind of all or nothing kind of dude.
yeah, he's
Um,
passionate. He's like he's all in it. He's not. He doesn't
nah,
have any romances. He's
yeah,
like he loves America so much.
yeah. Caps. I can't imagine Cap is on Tinder or anything like that. Like I think he's like,
No,
if
no,
I
he's
meet him
not.
at church,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. French tries to act like somebody, and he's like, oh, he's just she's a really nice woman.
Yeah.
We'll make Cap. He's like, I don't know if that's appropriate. Like,
So, let's transition out of Fantastic Four, and onto a project that you're currently working on, Deuce of Hearts, from Vault Comics.
mhm,
Um, it's a I read all of the issues,
mhm,
enjoyed them all, and it's an interesting premise, for a comic, especially again in dealing with romance because basically the gist of the book is that there's an app that allows you to kind of trade in on love and other people's emotions for ostensibly like life upgrades. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like other
RPG
people,
power ups basically, like
right?
your
Um,
and your strength and your luck.
right.
Instinct.
So tell everybody a little bit just about where the premise and the idea came from, and kind of how all that stuff works within the world of Deuce of Hearts.
Well, first it's written by Ricardo Mo, and then the colors are by Claudia Aguilar, and the letters are by Ryan Ferrier for issues 1 through 3, or one and 2, and I believe issues 3, 4, and 5 are lettered by Kim McLean.
Mhm.
And 5 comes out on Comixology on 25th of this month,
Great,
the final issue, and then we have a trade slated for the fall around October. I collect all 5 issues. So
nice.
basically, it's basically the story of Sullivan Husk. He's a Lothario, I guess would be the word I would use to describe
Hmm.
him. And we picked the story up after he's like 8 years into this journey.
Hmm.
Basically, what happens is one day he's with the love of his life, and they have a wonderful relationship. And he comes down with a terminal illness, and they can't cure him. No one knows what it is, and he's basically given his a month to live, so to speak. And he gets offered a Faustian deal from this character who's approaches him when he's on his deathbed. This character named Angelo or Andre. Sorry, I actually patterned the character after Angelo Moore from Fishbone. So I call him Angelo, but his name's Andre. So anyway, he offers him his deal. He offers him the ability to. He offers to cure him if he signs on to this app basically on this phone.
Right.
And the app is basically like it's called the Heartbreaker app. And what it is you can seduce people, and through the app on the phone, you can trade in their love for like a power up to your skill set, right?
Mhm.
So he takes the deal because he doesn't want to die. What he doesn't realize is once you trade in somebody's love, they lose the ability to feel love ever again, and they lose the ability to feel passion ever again.
Mm.
So basically, like after the first transaction, he trades in the love of his life, kind of like a Peter Parker one more day
Right.
scenario. His love of his life falls out of love with him. He goes on this quest of seducing people and then trading in their love for like charisma, strength, luck, or whatever. Um, and he doesn't realize the love of his life was pregnant at the time. So the first issue basically picks up 8 years into this journey, uh, where he's seduced countless people. He's left a husk of emotionless, loveless people in his wake, hence the name Sullivan Husk.
Mhm.
Um, at the end of the first issue, the daughter he didn't know he had shows up on his doorstep,
Mhm.
and then he has to deal with like the ramifications of that, and ultimately, like, what does he choose? Does he trade in the unconditional love of a child for immortality, or does he do the right thing and you know become a father to the child he didn't know he had? Meanwhile, they exist in this world where there's like an underworld of magic and
Right.
fantasy, right? So like Andre, the gentleman the character who uh, pulls him into this world is his between our world and the fantasy world, and it's through this bar. So Andre runs this bar. So whenever Sullivan like wants to get some information or know about goings on in the underworld, he goes to this bar and he talks to Andre. So I think Ricardo does a masterful job of like weaving between the fantasy and the reality, and keeps it just grounded enough to where it's like this is our world, this weird kind of fantasy world, but there's like this kind of like a Hellboy 2 troll market type
Right.
situation,
Right.
like underneath the surface where not everyone's aware of, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I what I enjoyed about it was that you've got this character who in some ways is a tragic figure, you know what I mean? Because he was kind of faced with this impossible choice of like, do you continue to live, or do you trade in the love of your life, basically, in that relationship. Um but as things go on, you're kind of like, part of you is like, do I really want this dude to to win? Like, am I fully on board with him and like the things that he's doing?
Yeah,
And I think it makes a really interesting, complicated character.
sure, sure. Well, and then that's the final issue. Uh, Answers a lot of those questions, or I think ties everything. I don't want to spoil anything, but
Yeah.
it basically like you see a full arc
Right.
of the character. So like those are things that are intended. So
Hmm.
like you know you're rooting for this guy. Like should I be rooting for this guy? He's kind of charming and witty and funny, right?
Right.
But also like to in his defense, he doesn't know. He finds out in the second issue that every trade that he does, like the people that he's traded in on, they're permanently damaged. But he doesn't
Right.
realize. And once he realizes this, it kind of does kind of shape him in a way, changes him in a way. So
Hmm.
it's not like he's just going around hurting people,
Yeah.
like leaving like basically like zombies in his wake intentionally. He just thinks
Right.
that he he's using them for in the moment, but they'll get over it, and they'll move on.
Right.
You know, and that's what most of us, I think, most people do. Like
Mhm.
people are lost in their own head and their own selfish needs. Yeah, all of us. I'm not myself included, and
Right.
we all kind of do things, and we don't realize like how we affect people and the damage that we do. You know, his is just pronounced because it's like definite. You know, I
So
also like
for
how the book kind of plays with the ideas of just consumption and commercialism and
definitely.
the world that we live in and how we treat each other like commodities, like
Mhm.
between dating apps and social media and the disconnect that seems to have been developed over the last like 5 years or so, or decade, ever since kind of the internet and social media has taken a hold. Where like I'm old enough to where I remember where the way the world was and the way people interacted with each other, you know, when I was 30, and now that I'm 41, I think how wow, it's changed pretty drastically. Just
Oh
like
yeah.
going out into the world and speaking to people, even people who I knew one way, you don't see them for years, and you see them again, you're like, you've changed, I've changed.
Yeah.
Our interactions have changed a little bit. There's like this different layer of like social anxiety that's there that I feel with like especially doing what I do and in the comics industry, people are you're secluded and you're in your own studio drawing in your own head all the time.
Mhm.
So, like you're on the internet a lot or you're on social media talking to people, and then you go out in the world and I realize how it's affected me.
Yeah.
I feel like I've become more reclusive myself and more like I have to work on my social skills more. You know,
Well, it's
I was a
definitely
bartender for 15 years before I was a comic artist. And I was forced to be social 5 nights a week
right.
my entire life, and being the outgoing like host of the party, behind a bar. And now I'm like, my life is completely different, so I can view it from that weird, perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting just looking at, this comic from the perspective of modern romance and the way that a lot of us, interact with each other, like you were saying, through, dating apps and social media because, I've viewed the internet in this way that it encourages you in some respects to create a totally alternative version of yourself because you can kind of curate who you are, in the way that people see you, and the way that you interact with people changes can change, from one social media platform or one app to another. And so nobody's going to go on a dating site and be like, here are all the shitty things about me that you should know about before we
Yeah,
start going out with each other, and then you can kind of decide before you meet me like what this is going to be like.
yeah,
And even just in terms of the way that people kind of approach that stuff, like I think um there's a whole generation of people who don't necessarily view the internet as a real place, and so for them those kind of virtual interactions are things that can kind of, like, yeah, like I was talking to this person online and then like I don't want to do that anymore, so I stop. And like the phenomenon, I guess, of ghosting on people and just kind of like just ceasing communication entirely. The idea of, just having these relationships that exist solely online, which, again, like I'm not knocking what anybody does, like that's perfectly fine, but it's something that we couldn't conceive of, even 10 years ago, of having an online relationship.
pen pals.
Or right. Yeah, I
You
mean,
wrote a letter, waited like another month for them to write you the letter back, and you like,
right.
you know, like I think I
Right.
tweeted the other day, which is I hate when I reference things that way, but like I wrote 2 letters this last week to people, like handwritten letters, and I snail mailed them and everything.
Mhm.
And it was like a feeling that I remember, like, oh yeah, this is like a really personal thing I'm doing,
Right.
for some, and I actually wrote like a nice long letter about things to somebody, and it was like, wow, this is really it had been so long, you know,
Yeah. Well,
it felt
and I
good.
don't
Like
well
actually,
w
this person knows that I'm like devoting time actually and
right.
putting them and I care. It's more personal.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, even, back in the day, with long distance love letters and things like that, that was something, like you said, like you had to actually sit down and take time to read what the person had written you, but also, I mean, you would do drafts. You would kind of write several versions of this, letter. And now, you can kind of either just, like we're doing now, you can just have a video chat with somebody, or you can just send them. And, I think, also I was watching the latest Chris Rock special last night,
in that.
and he was, basically talking about, yeah, like when my parents were, in a relationship, like when they were, coming up and they had us, like my dad would leave for work at, 7 or 8 in the morning, and then he wouldn't talk to my mom at all
Yeah.
until he got home.
Can you believe what this and my sister did it or nothing like that? It was like I come home and I tell you how my day went, and you tell me
Right.
how your day went, and then we have a conversation. And the same thing with the writing the letter. Like when you're forming the draft, I feel like people that gives them opportunity to formulate their thoughts.
Hmm.
So like you can actually think about how you feel about things, and
Right.
then we put a letter together. You've actually like documented your feelings. You
Right.
like went through them, right? So you didn't like just like tweet a thing or Facebook a thing that just off the cuff thing off the top of your head that you haven't really had time to like workshop,
Right.
you know, and then like everyone gets to see this horrible thought that you had or this incomplete. It's a, at the very least an incomplete thought that you had, like not a fully thought out premise or idea,
Right.
and they want that instead of like you writing this letter where you actually took like 30 minutes to like put it together, draft it. Do I really want to say this to this person, or how do I really feel, or you know,
Yeah.
and
No. And
and
it's
who you are internally too.
right.
Oh, this is who I am. This is who I fit. This is how I feel. These are my opinions and my beliefs, and I have them here and written down on paper.
Right.
So if we're like want to go back and remember how I felt, truly felt, there it is. Instead of like going on Facebook, like pops up like a year ago, you were here with this person and you said this horrible thing about Trump. Like,
Well, and I just wonder, what I mean, because I mean, there's no going back. We've crossed the threshold of the internet, like where there's no
yeah,
way.
but there's also like something because I teach in the summers.
Hmm.
So like I'm around, I'll be teaching like little kids, like littles, and like also middle schoolers too. And I've noticed that like the younger kids, the internet to them is passe. It's not really like for them to rebel is not to like join a Reddit forum and say horrible things, right? The rebellion to them is to like disconnect,
Yeah.
like be analog, right? Because
Right.
they grew up with this other thing. So to them, that's like something their parents do, and it's not cool. you know.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah.
there might be hope there. Just getting to them. I think like just that's going to be the issue, like dealing with this period of time we're in right now and
Yeah.
getting through it unscathed,
Yeah.
and like just being a bridge to a better world. It's probably like I think should be everyone's goals at this point. I think
I would hope so.
not be perfect, you know,
Yeah.
do whatever I can in my small little garden, like tend to that garden and try to make that a better place. Because
Oh,
honestly, like uh, there's certain I wonder in that the age gap of like the millennial types, if there's like there's pockets of people who are just lost causes,
right.
point, which I hate to say because I don't want to give up on anybody,
But that's
right?
I mean that's any generation though. I feel like those people exist.
But they're just like now with the internet, they're just like forever cordoned off to this dark place.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like they're in their 20s. What happens when they're in their 30s
Yeah.
or their 40s or their 50s? Like what is that? What do they? You know, I don't feel honestly. I feel bad for a lot of these trolls, but like in a way, it's like I'm glad that the internet wasn't around when I was a young man
No.
because like I don't know. I can't say that I wouldn't say something horrible online when I was like a 16-year-old or 17-year-old. I'm
Right.
16. I was an idiot. Like I had all kinds of horrible, stupid ideas and thoughts. Like I was still figuring out what it was to be an adult and a man and a compassionate person. It wasn't born a compassionate. Well, I guess we're all born compassionate babies. You know what I mean? You're raised in an environment like I was.
Yeah.
Not my history, but I had horrible things happening around me, and they shape me in certain ways at certain points in my life. So who's to say when I was 17, if there wasn't social media, I wouldn't post something horrible or say, say something stupid about women
Right. And I
back
think,
then.
yeah, the internet, I think that's the thing is that the internet, um, is a
People
tool. Like,
reverberate. They said they type of thing that's they're 17 or an 18-year-old whose name is like Slapshot Johnny 69 on Twitter, an anonymous person who has like an anime avatar, right?
yeah,
And they type something stupid, horrible, and ignorant, and then it reverberates through like all these people, and then people start sharing it, and then people get in their head that this is how everyone thinks.
right,
Oh, it's like some one person, 18-year-old idiot, but then
right.
other 18-year-old idiots find that and they cling to that, and then it becomes like a here I'm explaining how
But I do think that it's an interesting idea, specifically when it comes to relationships and emotional development. And that, again, when we were growing up, I grew up basically on the precipice of the internet. When I was in middle school and high school, like AOL Messenger and the chat rooms were the things that were kind of coming up and were prominent. And I think, you've got a generation that's growing up that's learning how to express their emotions and feelings through the filter of the internet. And it's difficult because, like you're saying, during those years you're very much so thinking about and being molded into, the person that you're going to become, later in life. And obviously, the capacity for people to change is always there to a certain extent. The older that you get, the harder it is to kind of, break those habits and those ideas. But when you're young, things are very fluid in terms of, it sometimes only just takes one event for you to say, oh, that's not good. Like, I should not do that. um
it wasn't even like when I was young. I remember just growing up, and you'd have older men or like your peers, boys or men, or when you're a little kid, you have teenagers or whoever it is that you're getting advice from a male point of view, and you would have. I remember guys telling me like, "Oh, well, you can't be friends with a woman," you know,
right,
like you either you're with them intimately, you want to have sex with them, or you're not attracted to them and they're not your friend, and or even like women you're attracted to or you find attractive, you can't be their friend because you're
that,
attracted to them.
that
There's
sounds
all
like
these
the Johnny Storm method of
yeah, there's all these like ideas that people are trying to just promote, and then when you're a kid, like you just it's just another idea. But I found that to be through my experiences in life to be complete bullshit.
right,
Friends, women that I'm attracted to that are just friends. That just because I find somebody attractive, like, doesn't mean that I want to be with them or even anything. It's like,
right,
are you cool? Are we friends? Like, that's
yeah,
really what matters, right? But when but you have that toxic masculinity, you know, going on, like, and that's never gone away. That's always been there. It's just we didn't have the internet back then, so we
yeah,
can like bring light to it. So maybe it, it comes around to being optimistic. Maybe the internet is kind of being a disinfectant in a way. Like
right.
all this has to come up, right? Like with Trump and everything. Like if Hillary would have won the election, how would have that? Where would we be at right now?
Hopefully a better place.
Well, we'd be in a better place for sure, right?
Yeah,
In a lot of ways, like on the borders and NATO and all this other stuff. But like within our government, like they would have impeachment hearings on her already. Like you do you not think that the House who investigated her on Benghazi for
oh yeah, no, I mean, politically,
it would
either
have
way, I think, the way that the Republicans are trending, yeah, like, I mean,
in place of Hillary as president, no doubt.
yeah,
Yeah, our country itself, I don't know because I have a feeling those guys are going to be those guys, and like when Obama won, those guys just used him as like the boogeyman, so to speak.
right.
So she would have just been an even worse version because they've been railing against her for
Oh yeah,
forever. Like it was since I was a kid, they've been hating on her. Like she coined the term right wing conspiracy because there actually was one. Against her and her husband. I mean, and they didn't do anything to like discredit that. Like they're not exactly like saints, especially Bill.
right.
Did some shady stuff, but they're not the monsters that they've been made out to be. They're
No,
politicians, in the modern age. You know, like I know the world would be better off if she would have won. I'm not saying, definitely not saying that.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean.
But this monster is president. No, I'm saying like maybe this is the disinfectant. So we have to deal with this. Like the NRA has been funded by the Russians.
Yeah.
You know, all this stuff has infiltrated our government and our political systems. It's the only way to eradicate it is to bring it to light instead of like just pushing it down and putting a band-aid over it and going like, oh, you know, because
Well,
those are going anywhere. They would have been dug in even deeper. You know,
oh yeah, and I think that you know,
the president to rail against. They'd be like, well, because then if they would have prosecuted these people, it's Hillary Clinton and the liberal Democrat government going after the GOP and their fundraising, right?
right,
Well, no, now it's actually there's a Republican president and the Department of Justice is Republicans and the IC is all Republicans. It's Republican on Republican fighting is the way it's going
right,
on. You know, and the Democrats are kind of like sitting there like Democrats usually do, like,
right.
hey guys, we want to pass a a fair employment bill or something,
Get out of here.
legislation. That's boring. Let's talk about all this scandalous sex crimes and
Right.
apes and
But yeah, no, I agree. I agree in the sense that the internet obviously is uh it's I mean it's a tool, so I mean everything depends on how you use it. Um but even in this age, with the Me Too movement and a lot of other things going on, like it has given voice to a lot of people who obviously didn't have that kind of voice before. And in terms of, again, just masculinity and a relationship kind of stuff, like you have a better view into the way that other people live and have lived. And I mean, again, obviously it's up to you as an individual to either perceive and kind of internalize some of the things that you're hearing, or to kind of be dismissive and kind of hold on to previous beliefs. But if you're looking for certain information, if you're open to other people's viewpoints, like you can see a lot of different things. And obviously sometimes that can devolve into things like Reddit, and 4chan and stuff like that, which again, like you pointed out, people give a lot of credit to, but it's like 17-year-old kids on the internet. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're giving them that power when you validate their
yeah,
ideas and viewpoints and turn them into larger things.
yeah.
But at the same time, you can hear from a lot of different people who have made mistakes, and you can learn from their mistakes at a sometimes hopefully at an early age before you make those mistakes, and can kind of see, oh, like that was going to be a bad idea. Like
I
I
my,
can.
from my experience though, I'm like one of these idiots that usually learns by committing the mistake myself. Like people tell me, don't do that, don't do that, and like the older I get, the more I listen. But like when I was a young man, I just wanted to make the
Right.
mistakes. I wasn't listening to anybody. So like I would really have to like be into like somebody's work or like thought they were. If I'm a young man, I have to really think they were cool or something
Right.
to them and what they had to say. So like musicians and artists were really influential.
Hmm.
Um, so I think like, but like just some rando on the internet. I probably me at 17, if I just talked to some person on the internet who I didn't think was like doing something cool, I probably would have dismissed them because I was
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
stupid kid. So, but
Well, yeah, let's close things out with I have two more questions about Deuce of Hearts that I'm curious about. Um as an artist, how do you handle and interpret romance? In your drawings and how you lay things out, because I think a lot of the times in romance comics, one of the hardest things to portray, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, from an artistic perspective, is a lot of the small moments and nuance within a relationship, which a lot of the times that's in the face and the eyes,
mhm,
kind of small gestures, intimate gestures, that I think work very well in, say, things like animation or live action film, but can probably be a challenge for you to draw and communicate just from a static image. So how do you kind of approach some of those challenges artistically?
sure. Um, well, like you said very well. Like those intimate moments, it's usually just like an eye gesture or a look, you know. and just kind of focusing on what's vital in that moment. I always like things like when someone touches you at a
Mhm.
moment that's important, like say you're at a loss or what have you, someone just gently puts their hand on you, or they like hands gently touching,
Yeah.
like a shot of just the two hands touching, or someone's hand being touched when they didn't expect it. So you'll see like the hand with the intent to touch,
Right.
with and within that hand, and then the hand that is kind of like shocked, like that feeling of like,
Right.
oh, like I like that, but I wasn't expecting that.
Mhm.
So just trying to get that is a challenge, but it's also like I would say living life and having experiences personally, like knowing what like I've lived a life, so I
Yeah.
can draw from those experiences of like for me personally, like was that like when someone I know somebody likes me, in that way, that feeling, and I still
Mhm.
remember that feeling, because you get it every once in a while, and it's like, or if somebody you weren't sure of liked you in that way, and all of a sudden it's validated,
Right.
or in the flip side, that feeling of like, when you're in a relationship with somebody, we all know, and we don't want to admit it when it happens, but we all know that minute that we realize when the relationship is over,
Yeah.
something is, it's gone, the spark is gone, right? And it's that moment, and we've either felt that about somebody, or another person's felt that about us.
Yeah.
Feel it in the way the interaction is, whether it's you talk less, so the dialogue is shorter, or it's
Mhm.
you're not intimate as much, or like they're just not as like affectionate with you. There's a distance, and you can take that into and use that in art. So like, um, a kiss, two lips, someone being kissed on the cheek gently, you know, while they're laying in bed, or like, you know, the hand on a pregnant stomach,
Mhm.
or all those things are like, as human beings, they're all like touchstones. So they're all reference points that we all
Right.
understand. And so it's just kind of like tapping into that humanity, you know. So it's
Nice.
kind of like that humanity that we feel like we might be losing through the internet, like coming to grips with that, and touching base with that again. And that's kind of what where I point of view I come at it from. And then just focusing on those moments, like Toni
Right.
said, like find what's important, draw the shit out of what's important,
Mhm.
and don't worry about anything else.
Uh, so with those moments, there's two things that I've heard from artists that can be difficult to draw, and that's kissing and hugging. Either kissing, you don't want it to look like two people are just smushing their faces together, and hugging, you don't want to make it look like either people are just grabbing each other or like weirdly groping each other.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like a
yeah. So which of those do you find harder to draw, and what are some ways that you go about drawing
uh,
each of those?
so like I have my favorite kiss I've ever drawn right here on my phone. I'll show it to
Oh,
you.
nice.
And it was from a short that was in the Undertow trade, written by Steve Orlando. Um,
Hmm.
so it takes place in Atlantis, and there's an Atlantean. It's a polyamorous Atlantean relationship. It's written by Layla Del Duca, and basically like these three Atlanteans. Um, one of them is going ready to go off to war to fight in this big Atlantean war that the main story of Undertow is revolved around. So it's basically a goodbye, between
Hmm.
these two characters, these two female characters. And I think when I'm drawing a kiss, for me it's like the connect. For me, it's like the actual like where the lips connect.
Hmm.
I think it's kind of neat when you can kind of like eliminate the lines in that area where it becomes more of like intimate, where they lose themselves into each other through the kiss, you know,
Right.
without it being like lip on lip, like smush, but like a grotesque, like crumb drawing, where it's like
Right.
it's going everywhere. It's a nice moment. Hugging is all about anatomy and just drawing through things. Drawing a hug to me is more like what kind of hug is it? So like in Karma Police, I had to draw a hug between friends, and that's a different hug than hug between people who are having sex.
Right.
There's more of a pelvis involved when it's like a sex hug, you're pressing against each other. But when it's like a friend hug, it's like, especially when it's like an adult hugging a child. You
Right.
want to make sure that that's like a So you kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
Hugging isn't really hard for me, really, because it's like it's just anatomy, and the
Hmm.
intent for me, and that's all on like the back and the hips and everything like that. And kissing though is a little different because you can get if you draw a kiss bad, like it's trickier. There's subtlety to that. So like if you draw
Yeah.
a kiss, it turns into like something gross.
Yeah.
It's like if you're walking around on the street and you see two people kissing,
Yeah.
right? Like sometimes you walk past two people kissing, you don't even notice. It's just like, oh,
Right.
they pecked each other. But then sometimes you walk by people and they're full on like having a session,
Yeah.
and it's like noticeable and you can hear it. It's like gross sounding and smacking and you know, and it's all in the way you do it. I guess it's on the delivery.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's what the scene calls for, and you just want to make them that obnoxious, gross
Yeah.
couple making out in the street.
Are they drunk? Are they Johnny Storm and Medusa? Bye bye. Or is this like a Reed and Sue where it's missionary at 8:45 and we just
Do you think Reed has like
a
done
timer?
the math on like the perfect kiss? Like, do you think he's done like
Yeah.
he's got
Right? It's the perfect kiss. And he's perfected it so much that now Sue just thinks it's boring. Because
it's the
it's like, yeah, there's no passion behind it. So what
right.
he doesn't realize is like you can get the scientific perfect kiss down pat. If there's no passion behind it, it's meaningless. You know?
Well, it's
Like
weird too because
time
he's
it's
probably like
time for sex. Ding. And it starts to click. And you get three perfectly placed kisses at specific points of the body that will promote the proper amount of arousal for you.
well, it's I mean, just knowing Reed, I mean, it's probably creepy to think about, but he's probably like measured like lip to lip surface area, circumference, like diameter, like how should I adjust my lips to like perfectly like meet her. So yeah. But I mean again, you can't put it past Reed. He might do some weird shit like that.
Yeah. And then Sue just like vanishes. She's like, like I can't see myself doing this.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the perfect place to end this conversation. Thank you so much for being on. Let everybody know where they can find you, what you're working on now, what they should be looking out for you from the future.
They can find me on Twitter at Tony Gregory or Instagram at Tony Gregory, but it's Tony, like toe, knee,
Yeah.
like your toe and your feet and your knee. And I'm not on Facebook, thank the Lord. And Juice of Hearts, like I said, comes out on the 25th on Comixology digitally, the
Mhm.
final issue. And then the trade comes out through Vault in the fall.
All right.
And so I have some big things coming up that hopefully I can talk about.
Nice.
Yeah, that I've been working on for a while with some people that have yet to be announced or solidified, but they're
Hmm.
definitely so. Yeah, look out for that.
Definitely. Well, thank you once again, and thank everybody at home for listening to another episode of Stark After Dark.
Thanks,
Uh,
John.
yeah, yeah, no, and I mean, look, if we can think of more things to talk about, definitely
Oh, yeah.
have you on as a repeat guest. So,
Yeah, we could talk about like Luke and Leia and what happened Fire and Return of the Jedi where they're on that ship.
oh, there's a lot of yeah, God, there's so much just weird shit.
You know?
Romance is weird.
Yeah, it is.
All right, that's gonna do it for us, but we'll catch you next time. Thanks.